Welcome to Tardisian Files, a show dedicated to reviewing and discussing aspects of one of the most loved and longest-running British sci-fi shows. This podcast is a non-profit, fan-led series where we pull together sources from all across Doctor Who's extended media, including the show itself, comics, audio stories, and novels. Hello everybody! My goodness, do I have a lot to say about this episode. Last night, we were all treated to the final instalment of the Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials titled The Giggle. Now, mind you, a lot happened in this episode, so before we start off with the review, I am going to try and recap the episode as best as I can, so there will be a spoiler alert, and there may be some oversimplifications for the sake of time. So, the episode starts back on the street with the Doctor and Donna witnessing the world in crisis, with Donna having been gone 2 days since she left. And the reason for this crisis? Everyone thinks that they're right. Cue political jokes and commentary, of course. Meanwhile, in 1925, on October the 2nd, the first broadcast is made on TV. The face of a puppet with a harrowing giggle. In the present, the Doctor and Donna are brought to Unit, where the Doctor is reunited by none other than Melanie Bush, played by Bonnie Langford. This, for me personally, came as quite a surprise. I wasn't expecting her until season 14, but hey ho, we have Melanie Bush back on the scene. The Doctor is also reunited with Shirley and Kate Stewart, who tell the Doctor that the madness that's enveloping the world started 2 days ago with the launch of a South Korean satellite, which replaced the old Archangel network, hint hint for the eagle-eyed, and connecting all of humanity with a screen and the internet for the first time. The Doctor then reveals that every screen on Earth has been invaded by the image of the Giggle from 1925, and so he and Donna travel back to 1925, where they come face to face with the puppet master, the celestial toy maker. He tricks them into entering his domain, where he taunts the Doctor about the deaths of each of his companions between his 11th and 12th incarnation. However, the Doctor then tricks the toy maker into playing a game. The highest card wins. The toy maker draws the highest card, also revealing that an undead master is now trapped inside his golden tooth. However, the Doctor surprises him by revealing that they are now actually tied, since the Doctor won the last game they played, which means they are bound by an age-old rule. Best of 3. They have one more match to play before a winner can be declared. And so, the toy maker then decides to flee back to 2023, followed by the Doctor. Meanwhile, Unit destroys the Korean satellite with a galvanic beam, but the Doctor arrives telling them they have a new problem: the toy maker. After a theatrical and deadly entrance, the toy maker takes control of the galvanic beam on the Unit tower balcony. The Doctor tries to reason with the toy maker, but in a shocking twist, the toy maker shoots the 14th Doctor, wishing to play with the 15th incarnation. Except, the Doctor doesn't just regenerate here, he bi-generates. That's right, splitting from the 14th Doctor comes the 15th. Amazing and brilliant, they challenge the toy maker to a game of catch, and they win. The Doctors declare their prize to be to banish the toy maker forever. And just like that, the toy maker folds in on himself, and Mel traps him in his toy box which he left behind during his departure from 1925. And finally, unseen by everyone, as Kate begins the clean-up protocols, a hand with painted red nails picks up the golden tooth left behind by the toy maker. The two Doctors then talk for a while, with the 15th telling the 14th Doctor he needs to slow down. Donna agrees, and using a circus ground mallet, the 15th Doctor splits the TARDIS into two, leaving one for them both before finally saying goodbye. The episode then cuts to a scene where we see the 14th Doctor at the Noble household having a meal with his newfound family, including Mel, who it seems has also become another regular at the Noble's house. The Doctor declares to Donna that he's never been happier. We then cut to the 15th Doctor in TARDIS 2, flying off into the universe. After which, we get another exciting preview of the Christmas special for 2023, Goblins. So, despite the fact that I may have oversimplified that recap a little bit, it is fair to say that this episode had me at the edge of my seat. It was full of twists and turns, and I couldn't stop yelling and giggling and crying at points. It was just amazing. It was the best way, I think, to end the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, and not to mention the fact that it introduced a whole lot of new lore into the new reboot of the show. And so, the pros of this episode include the following. Not only was this a top-notch performance by Neil Patrick Harris, not bad for somebody who didn't even know what Doctor Who was until being cast, but it also did three amazing things for the new era of Doctor Who. It wrapped up an age-old storyline from decades ago. It had humorous throwbacks to the classic and the 2005 to 2021 revival series, including the 11th and 12th Doctor's companions, the Archangel Network from Season 3, Melanie Bush's return, and much, much more. 2, it set up future storylines, with the most notable being who stole the golden tooth containing the Master, and of course the Master's inevitable return. Additionally, there's the storyline of The One Who Waits, mentioned by both the Celestial Toymaker in the episode and by Beep the Meep in the Star Beast. We still don't know who it is, and it's likely that they are the one who is the so-called boss that was mentioned in the Star Beast. Now, I think this personally because the Meep mentioned before that two-hearted species are rare to find. I think that this means that maybe the boss is either maybe a link to the Timeless Child species or another Gallifreyan, or it could potentially be the one founding father of Gallifrey that hasn't been killed or decommissioned or cast out in the last few series of the show. That being Omega. He's not returned since the 1980s, and considering the fact that Russell T Davies has made numerous throwbacks to classic villains, it could be that Omega is another villain that we'll see being brought back in the new era of the show. Ultimately, we'll have to wait for the 15th Doctor's tenure to find out, but who cares? It's going to be fun to watch, and it'll be equally fun to speculate about in a future episode of this podcast. And finally, sticking true to his word in the media over the last week, RTD has provided the perfect opportunity to follow through on his promise that Yasmin Finney's Rose Noble will return by implying that she herself has been on a trip or two in 14's TARDIS when they later cut to the scene where the Doctor is with the Nobles at their house. So, does this mean that she'll appear in the new series of Doctor Who alongside the 15th Doctor, or does this mean that she'll get her own spin-off? We'll have to wait to find out, but it sets this up perfectly, and judging by the trajectory of the show, it seems likely that this is going to be a very viable plot for a spin-off, even if it's just in the audios to show that this isn't just going to be a throwaway subplot that never sees the light of day. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to seeing what they do with this raw potential for a new show. Overall, the episode was very well put together, with new and old lore feeding well into one another to produce the subplot of the Giggle to set up the suspense for the episode, and then the main plot which set up the climax, being the Toymaker's games and the eventual defeat of the Celestial Toymaker. Additionally, the concept of bi-generation, a cryptobiological phenomenon which the genetics academic in me will be discussing in a future episode, gave the Tennant stands the chance to have a new Doctor whilst keeping the old one, meaning that if Tennant has signed up to continue his role as the 14th Doctor in some capacity, This means that a potential new spin-off is all potentially in the works, and we get to see more of him and Catherine Tate potentially. And this actually feeds well into something that was mentioned in the last episode of the podcast, where I said that we're getting very close to the quote-unquote end of the 14th Doctor's time in the TARDIS. Now that we know that the 14th and the 15th Doctor both exist in the same universe, we know that his time is not over just yet. So that, I think, was a very nice plot point to have, and personally I liked it very much. Another thing I probably should have mentioned, which I liked very much indeed, was the fact that this episode fed on directly from the Wild Blue Yonder. Not only did it wrap up where we left off with Wilf's last appearance, but also the Doctor explicitly states that it was he who let the Celestial Toymaker back in the previous episode by invoking a superstition using salt at the edge of the universe, where the walls of reality were thin, as he put it in the previous episode. Additionally, this superstition was then mentioned one more time by Kate when the Toymaker's box was supposed to be taken down for containment, where she said explicitly, bind it in salt. So this means that the Toymaker is probably now bound by the use of salt as a superstitious means of protection from him and other beings like him, which I thought was a nice plot point to add, because the Celestial Toymaker is, for all intents and purposes, a metaphysical being. Finally, I like the way that the writers of the show actually wrapped up the whole heavy burden weighing on the 14th Doctor left over from the Flux, and not to mention other trauma the Doctor's been through, having since last met Donna, because it meant that the anguish that the Doctor expressed to Donna in the previous episode wasn't just thrown away as a subplot that never gets revisited, but actually becomes a viable and important part of the 14th Doctor's character development. This provided a very refreshing look at the Doctor's character, the fact that while being billions of years old and has the potential to live on forever, the Doctor is not completely invulnerable to those same feelings of essentially depression and guilt that we as the audience probably also have experienced, obviously perhaps not to the same extent, but it just made the Doctor, particularly the 14th Doctor, a lot more relatable to the audience. And I think that because we are moving into an era now where these discussions are being held more openly on shows like Doctor Who, I thought that it was a nice way of staying consistent with the 14th Doctor's character development and essentially providing some relief for the 14th Doctor, showing him at a later date being much happier and actually following the advice of his friends and himself. So overall, I would say that those are the major pros of this episode. I think it was very well put together, and honestly, like I said before, every second of that episode had me on the edge of my seat. It was an amazing way to end the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, and I, for one, am quite grateful for this episode. With all that said, however, there are a few cons that I picked out on this episode. The most obvious one being the concept of bi-generation, which I'm sort of viewing as a bit of a blessing and a curse for the show. The reason for that being is that we now have two regenerating, fully Time Lord / Timeless Child Doctors with TARDISes in the same universe. Now, we've had different versions of the Doctor before. We've had the Dr. Donna, we've had the Meta-Crisis Doctor. All of them have either had their storylines wrapped up, or in the Meta-Crisis Doctor's case, he was sent to another universe. And it's one of those things where, yes, there have been multiple Doctors on the show before, but this is the first time we've actually had two in the same universe living roughly parallel to one another, or about as parallel as they can be, with one is clearly travelling through time and space more often than the other. So with that in mind, I have no problem with the concept of bi-generation. It will be fun to explore that, but my hope is that Russell T Davies has actually made plans for this double Doctor act, as it were, and that it doesn't become a throwaway storyline. Instead, it is used the potential for this is used as one would expect. Create a spin-off, create an audio series, just do something with this Double Doctor act. Like, don't just forget about it. Another con was the use of the toy maker. So while the toy maker was fun, formidable, and of course being Neil Patrick Harris, the toy maker was fabulous, I felt the toy maker was somewhat underused because compared to his original debut, where the episode took place entirely in his domain and under his rules, in this episode, however, the toy maker was essentially spread thin because the Doctor and Donna were only trapped briefly in his domain. Meanwhile, all of Earth was snared in another one of the toy maker's games. And then the final match between the Doctors and the toy maker, while very good at building suspense, was somewhat anticlimactic because it was just a game of catch, a very intense one, but it built up a lot of suspense just for the toy maker to literally fold like carpet, which wasn't really the climactic ending I was hoping for the toy maker, who is from the pre-universe, potentially one of the Elder Gods, and has previously been portrayed as just a bit more formidable and powerful. Like, the toy maker was reduced to being more of a comedic villain in this episode, I found, which was fine, but it just wasn't the best use of the toy maker in my opinion. Additionally, while this wasn't necessarily a con per se, I do feel compelled to mention that for the more politically minded audience members, you may have noticed that there was fairly strong political commentary in the form of relatively funny jokes in the episode. Now, I personally tend to try and keep politics off the podcast wherever possible. However, if anyone does wish to engage in open discussion of the political issues that were raised in the episode, please do feel free to do so in the comments section of this episode on our social media pages, and of course, please remember to be respectful. With all that said, I thought the episode was a shining example of the potential that the show has now that it has a much larger audience, a much larger budget, and of course, Russell T Davies is back at the writing board. I think that this episode was a wonderful way to end the 60th anniversary. It was full of twists and suspense and climax, and it was everything you'd expect from an action-packed, modern episode of Doctor Who. It didn't kill off Donna like some people were suspecting, which was very good in my opinion. Like, I was worried for a moment there, but I am glad that that didn't happen. And additionally, I thought it was a wonderful way to reintroduce Nell back into the show, and I thought that it set up future storylines perfectly, and thankfully the eagle-eyed of the audience, which, let's face it, is all of us, will have noticed every little bit in the episode that set up new storylines, wrapped up old ones, and all of the references made to the previous eras of Doctor Who, giving us a chance to now look forward to the new era of Doctor Who and potentially 60 more years of the show on our airways. I, for one, cannot wait, and I give this episode a rating of 14 out of 15. Get it? 14 out of 15?
If you enjoyed today's scenario, please leave a like and tell your friends. You can check out some of our other material, either on Spotify or Google Podcasts. You can also follow our Instagram page at Tardisian Files Podcasts for regular updates and news about upcoming content. As always, join us next time on Tardisian Files. See you then, everyone!